Indecision doesn't feel dangerous. That's why it wins. It doesn't crash your life. It doesn't embarrass you. It doesn't announce itself. It just drains you, quietly, day after day, until one day you look up and realize you've been busy for years and moved almost nowhere. Indecision is not confusion. It's avoidance pretending to be thoughtfulness. And it's costing you more than any wrong decision ever could. Here's the first truth most people never hear. Indecision is a decision. It's a decision to stay where you are, to preserve comfort, to delay responsibility, to avoid consequences, and because nothing visibly breaks, you assume you're safe. You're not. You're stagnating. Now let's talk about why indecision feels smart. Because it uses intelligence against you. You think, you analyze, you weigh options, you imagine outcomes. That feels responsible. But here's what's really happening. You're using thought to delay action, and delay compounds. Now let's talk about the lie at the center of indecision. If I think a little longer, I'll choose better. No, you'll choose later. That's the only guarantee. Because clarity doesn't come from thinking, it comes from movement. Thinking without movement creates loops. Loops feel productive. They're not. They're traps. Now, let's talk about the emotional cost of indecision. Indecision is exhausting. Not physically, mentally. You carry unresolved choices everywhere. In the background, like open tabs in your brain. Each one drains focus, energy, presence. That's why you feel tired even when you're not doing much. Your mind is busy maintaining ambiguity. Decisive people don't carry that weight. They choose, and the mental noise stops. Now, let's talk about fear. People think fear stops action. It doesn't. Fear sharpens action. Indecision is what fear uses to stall you. Fear doesn't say, don't act. It says, not yet. Think a bit more. Wait for clarity, and you listen, because it sounds reasonable. That's how fear stays in control. Now, let's talk about perfection. Indecision loves perfectionism. You don't want to choose the wrong thing, so you wait for the right one. The right option never arrives, because rightness is only visible after commitment. You can't evaluate paths you haven't walked, so you stand still, waiting for certainty. Certainty never comes. Now let's talk about opportunity cost. This is where indecision really hurts you. When you don't choose one path, you're not neutral. You're choosing against every other path. Time passes. Windows close. Skills atrophy. Energy shifts. Indecision doesn't preserve options. It quietly removes them. Now let's talk about momentum. Momentum is built by decisions. Small ones. Imperfect ones. Indecision kills momentum before it starts. No movement. No feedback. No adjustment. Just thought. Thought without action creates anxiety. Action creates clarity. That's the order. Now let's talk about identity. Indecision slowly reshapes how you see yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone who acts. You see yourself as someone who thinks about acting. You become cautious, hesitant, non-committal. That identity is sticky. And once it forms, even small decisions feel heavy. Now let's talk about regret. People regret wrong decisions less than they regret no decisions. Wrong decisions teach. No decisions haunt. Because you never know what could have happened. Indecision creates permanent question marks. Those question marks don't fade. They follow you. Now let's talk about confidence. Confidence is built by evidence. Evidence comes from action. Indecision produces no evidence. So confidence erodes. You start doubting yourself, not because you failed, but because you never proved anything. Now let's talk about smart people. Smart people suffer the most from indecision because they can see every angle, every risk, every downside. So they wait. Less intelligent people act. They learn by doing. Over time, they surpass the thinkers, not because they're better, because they moved. Now let's talk about control. Indecision feels like control. It's not. It's surrender. You surrender control to time, to circumstances, to other people's decisions. Decisive people shape their lives. Indecisive people react to what's left. Now, let's talk about stress. Indecision creates chronic stress, low grade, constant. Because your brain hates unresolved loops. It wants closure. Every open decision keeps your nervous system slightly activated. That's why you feel on edge for no clear reason. You're carrying too many maybes. Now, let's talk about the myth of keeping options open. That sounds smart. It's usually cowardice. Keeping options open means not committing. Not committing means not building. Not building means not progressing. Most opportunities require commitment to unlock. Open options don't compound. Chosen paths do. Now let's talk about the social side. Indecision makes you unreliable. Not maliciously, but subtly. You say, maybe. You delay responses. You hesitate. People stop waiting on you. They move on. Opportunities don't announce when they're gone. They just stop coming. Now let's talk about self-respect. Every time you avoid a decision, you teach yourself, I don't trust my judgment. That lesson compounds. Soon, even simple choices feel heavy. Because you've trained doubt, decisive people trust themselves, not because they're always right, but because they're willing to adjust. Indecision avoids adjustment by avoiding action. Now let's talk about the illusion of safety. Indecision feels safe because nothing changes. But nothing changing is not safety. It's decay. Everything that doesn't grow deteriorates. Skills, relationships, relevance. You don't stay the same by standing still. You fall behind. Now let's talk about the hidden arrogance of indecision. This is uncomfortable. You believe you can think your way into the perfect outcome. You believe action should be flawless. That belief assumes you're above trial and error. You're not. No one is. Winners accept that learning requires movement. Indecision delays humility, and humility is where growth starts. Now let's talk about urgency again. Indecision kills urgency. Everything feels optional. Nothing feels necessary. When nothing is necessary, nothing happens. Decisive people create necessity. They choose. And choice creates consequences. Consequences create urgency. Urgency creates focus. Now let's talk about the pattern. Indecision doesn't look dramatic. It looks like researching longer, asking more opinions, revisiting the same choices, waiting for a sign. Those behaviors feel active. They're avoidance. Now let's talk about where you are. There's something you've been circling, a decision you keep revisiting, a direction you keep postponing. You tell yourself you're being careful. You're not. You're stuck. And the longer you stay stuck, the harder movement feels. Now let's strip this down. Indecision is silently ruining you because it steals the one thing progress requires. Commitment, not perfect commitment. Temporary commitment. Enough to move. Enough to learn. Enough to adjust. Because knowing indecision is harmful isn't enough. You need to know how to break it. How to decide without certainty. How to move without guarantees. Breaking indecision doesn't require courage. It requires a rule that makes indecision impossible. Decisive people don't feel braver than you. They just remove the option to keep thinking forever. Here's the rule they live by. If a decision is reversible, decide fast. If it's irreversible, decide slow, but decide. Most of what you're stuck on is reversible. Jobs can change. Projects can pivot. Strategies can adjust. You're treating flexible decisions like permanent ones. That's why you freeze. Now, let's talk about the second rule. Decisions are temporary commitments, not life sentences. This reframes everything. You don't need to choose the perfect path. You need to choose a path long enough to gather feedback. Feedback beats speculation every time. Now let's talk about how decisive people think under uncertainty. They don't ask, is this the right choice? They ask, is this a reasonable next step? That question lowers pressure. Reasonable doesn't mean perfect. It means actionable. Now let's talk about fear again. Fear doesn't need certainty. Fear needs delay. So decisive people starve fear by acting before it builds stories. They don't give fear time to negotiate. They decide inside a time box. Example, I'll choose within 24 hours. I'll choose by Friday. I'll choose after 3 options. Once the box closes, the decision is made. No extensions. Time limits collapse indecision. Now let's talk about how to decide when you feel stuck between options. You stop comparing futures. You compare cost of delay. Ask one question. What happens if I don't choose anything for the next 30 days? That answer is usually worse than choosing imperfectly. Delay always has a cost. You've just been ignoring it. Now let's talk about regret. People fear regretting the wrong choice, but regret comes more often from inaction, not action. Wrong choices create stories. No choices create ghosts. You can correct a wrong path. You can't correct time you never used. Now let's talk about identity again. Indecision has trained you to see yourself as someone who needs more information. Decisiveness trains a different identity. Someone who figures it out by moving. That identity shift is powerful because now uncertainty doesn't stop you. It activates you. Now let's talk about confidence again. Confidence doesn't come from making good decisions. It comes from handling consequences. Decisive people trust themselves, not because they choose perfectly, but because they trust their ability to adapt. That trust is built only one way, by deciding. Now let's talk about the mental clutter indecision creates. Once you decide, even if it's the wrong choice, something happens. Mental space opens. Focus returns. Energy increases because the loop closed. That alone often makes the decision right enough. Now, let's talk about the discipline of commitment. Decisive people commit just long enough to test reality. Not forever, not blindly, long enough to learn. Then they adjust. Indecisive people wait for learning without testing. That never works. Now let's talk about mistakes. Mistakes made early are cheap. Mistakes made late are expensive. Indecision pushes mistakes later. Decisiveness pulls them forward. That's an advantage. Now let's talk about the myth of intuition. You're waiting for a gut feeling. Intuition improves with experience. Experience requires action. So waiting for intuition before acting is backwards. You build intuition after choosing and seeing results. Now let's talk about the final habit that kills indecision. 1 decision per day. Every day, you choose one thing you've been avoiding deciding. Small, medium, doesn't matter. You decide, and you move on. This trains decisiveness like a muscle. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Then it feels normal. Then it feels freeing. Now, let's talk about the moment indecision loses its grip. It's not dramatic. You don't feel fearless. You feel lighter because your mind isn't carrying open loops anymore. You stop thinking about what you might do and start dealing with what you are doing. That's peace. Now, the final challenge. This is not motivational. It's interruptive. Right now, identify one decision you've been delaying. 1. Set a time limit. 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour. At the end of that window, choose. Not perfectly, reasonably. Then act on it today, not tomorrow. Today. If this exposed how indecision has been quietly draining you, leave a comment with one word. Decided. And subscribe if you want more of this. Not overthinking. Not analysis paralysis, but the mental clarity that turns hesitation into forward motion. Because indecision doesn't protect you. It slowly erases you. And the moment you choose, momentum replaces doubt. And how to replace indecision with momentum permanently.